Rian Salas had never fit cleanly into the shimmering machinery of the Empire. He was a man of grease-stained fingers and sleepless eyes, scraping a living on Regulus 7, a capital station polished to blinding perfection. Every day he crawled through starship hulls like a ghost no one noticed, tightening bolts that held the Empire's fleets together, yet remaining invisible to those who sailed them. His life was simple. Work until his hands shook, accept pay barely enough for meals, and sleep in a maintenance pod smaller than most nobles' closets. Despite the grind, he carried a stubborn pride. Humans were known for surviving on little, enduring hardship with a grit that baffled other species, and he wore that reputation with quiet certainty. The shift had ended hours late, and exhaustion pulled at his bones as he trudged through the station's polished corridors. His maintenance pass, a flimsy card that flickered every few hours, had been swapped earlier by an inattentive clerk, but he hadn't cared. He only wanted a place to sit, something warm to drink, and a moment where the weight of survival wasn't pressing on him. The hunger gnawing at his stomach pushed him forward until he found a wide, gleaming hall he assumed was an upper-tier cafeteria reserved for staff lucky enough to work near the palace district. The architecture was absurdly extravagant for a dining area, but he chalked it up to imperial sensibilities. Everything on Regulus 7 looked like it belonged in a cathedral. He scanned his pass at the entry arch. The scanner glowed gold, not the usual dull green, and chimed in a tone far too elegant for a mechanic's privilege level. Rian frowned, but the doors parted with a gentle hum. Whatever the clerk had handed him, it seemed to be working, and he was starving enough to ignore the oddity. Inside, the hall was nearly empty, lined with tables of obsidian stone and surrounded by towering banners bearing the imperial crest. Soft music drifted from unseen speakers. Every detail radiated wealth beyond anything he could conceive of, but fatigue drowned his curiosity. He picked a table at the center, sat down, and exhaled with the relief of a man who hadn't rested properly in days. A hovering attendant glided toward him, its polished chrome surface reflecting his disheveled appearance. Rian rubbed his forehead and muttered, "Just a synth coffee. Cheapest you've got." The attendant paused, and its light flickered in confusion. It hesitated before whirring away, as if deeply offended. Rian shrugged. Machines on this station always acted dramatic around him. Only after a few moments did he realize the silence in the room had sharpened. He glanced around. At the far end, two robed nobles stared at him as if witnessing a crime. Servants froze mid-step, eyes wide. A cluster of armored guards entering from a side corridor halted abruptly, gripping their weapons. Confusion rippled through the hall like a cold draft. Rian blinked back at them, baffled by the sudden tension, wondering if his face was dirtier than usual or if human mechanics simply weren't welcome in fancy cafeterias. The guards advanced, their boots striking the marble floor with unified precision. One of them, a stern officer with a scar down his cheek, stepped forward. "State your identity," he commanded. Rian raised both hands instinctively. "Rian Salas. Mechanic 3rd class. I'm just trying to eat, all right? My pass scanned just fine." The officer scanned the pass and went rigid. His jaw tightened. Without explanation, he signaled for more guards, and the small army encircled Rian's table. A murmur spread through the hall as the doors opened again, this time accompanied by a formation of elite honor guards whose armor shimmered like onyx glass. They moved with ceremonial precision, announcing a presence of immense significance. Rian straightened, unsure whether he should stand or remain seated. Any chance of finishing a quiet meal evaporated as the aura in the room shifted into something reverent and fearful. Between the guards glided a hovering stasis chair carrying a young woman whose stillness was so profound it seemed unnatural. Her features were pale, carved with exhaustion, and her eyes, though open, did not shift or react. She appeared suspended between life and something colder, held in place by a delicate lattice of light and humming medical conduits. Even from a distance, Rian sensed the weight of tragedy around her. He had heard whispers of an imperial heir injured in an assassination attempt months ago, though he never paid attention to noble politics. Still, recognition dawned slowly. This must be the Emperor's daughter, Princess Lyra Valen, the paralyzed jewel of the Empire. Servants scrambled to arrange the table directly across from him. His table, he realized with dawning horror. His pounding heart made it hard to breathe as the truth slammed into him. He wasn't in a cafeteria. He was in the Imperial Nexus Hall, a private sanctum reserved for the Emperor and his inner circle. Whatever glitch on his pass had led him through was now a catastrophe of historic proportions. The honor guards positioned themselves with rigid discipline. High Lord Varos, an advisor whose presence radiated authority, strode toward Rian with thunder etched into his expression. "You," he said, voice low and dangerous, "are seated where no commoner, let alone a mechanic, should stand, much less eat." Rian swallowed hard, fighting the urge to apologize so quickly he'd choke on his own words. "Sir, I swear I thought this was a mess hall." "The pass." Varos cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Silence. Your ignorance is no excuse." Rian braced for the guards to drag him away, but as he turned his head in resignation, something odd caught his attention. The stasis chair carrying the princess hovered slightly unevenly, its lower alignment panel vibrating in a pattern he recognized from worn-out industrial lifts. A faint microglitch in its optical stabilizers produced a cyclical shimmer of blue light, barely noticeable unless one spent a lifetime fixing cheap machinery that failed in similar ways. Whoever had built the system had done so with extraordinary skill, but the execution now showed inefficiencies, misalignments, and what looked disturbingly like deliberate microfractures. He stared longer than he realized, his mechanic instincts overriding his sense of danger. He leaned closer and muttered without thinking, "Whoever calibrated that support frame didn't know what they were doing." The words slipped out softly, but in the cavernous hall they might as well have been shouted. The guards froze in outrage. Varos spun toward him with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. Before he could bark an order, a soft sound carried through the hall, a faint, deliberate blink from the princess, her gaze shifting ever so slightly toward the mechanic who had dared speak. The guards hesitated. Varos hesitated. Even the attendants paused mid-motion. Rian, confused, met the princess's eyes and felt a fragile spark of awareness staring back at him as if she'd grasped something no one else had heard. In that tiny motion, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition not of status, but of competence, of someone finally noticing what others had missed. The moment held, delicate and electrifying, as the hall waited for the next breath. 2 hours after being dragged from the hall, Rian Solis sat alone in a stark interrogation chamber that smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled air. The room was an exercise in intimidation, smooth black walls, a single metal table, and a shifting pane of one-way glass that made him feel as though invisible predators circled just beyond sight. His wrists were unbound, but the presence of armed guards flanking the door ensured he understood how little freedom he truly had. He tried to calm his racing heart, though each breath tasted of fear and the metallic tang of regret. One wrong seat, one muttered observation, and his life had twisted into something unrecognizable. A new figure entered the room, his attire immaculate, his posture authoritarian. The man's expression was controlled, but not emotionless. He looked at Rian as if examining both a threat and a puzzle. "Rian Solis," he began, voice firm but measured, "your unauthorized presence in the Imperial Nexus Hall constitutes a breach that warrants immediate execution." Rian flinched despite trying not to. However, the man continued, sliding a data pad onto the table. "Your remark about the princess's stasis chair has complicated matters." Rian blinked, unsure whether this complication was about to save or doom him. "I wasn't trying to insult anyone," he said quietly. "I just saw something wrong." The interrogator leaned forward. "Explain," he commanded. Rian searched for words, stumbling at first, but gaining confidence as he spoke. He described the jitter in the stabilization field, the microshudder in the frame structure, the resonance mismatch, details so minute that even the station's elite engineers might dismiss them as irrelevant. But Rian articulated each observation with the certainty of someone accustomed to coaxing sputtering machinery back to life with bare hands and stubborn intuition. By the time he finished, the interrogator's mask of indifference had slipped into something resembling intrigue. Without a word, the man left the room. Minutes stretched painfully, thick with uncertainty. When the door opened again, it wasn't the interrogator who returned. Instead, a pair of Imperial guards stepped in and ordered Rian to stand. He obeyed, half expecting a walk to the execution chamber. Instead, they escorted him through a winding corridor, past security checkpoints that felt far above his clearance level, until they stopped before towering golden doors engraved with the Imperial crest. The doors parted to reveal Emperor Kael Valen. Just as the stories described, the Emperor was tall and severe, with silvered hair and eyes that carried a weight no throne could lighten. Yet there was something else in his gaze: fatigue, grief, and a quiet fury that seemed colder than the void outside the station. Rian bowed automatically, knees nearly buckling under the oppressive pressure of the moment. "You spoke boldly in the Nexus Hall," the Emperor said, his voice unyielding but not hostile. "You saw fault where others saw perfection." He paused, studying Rian with unnerving intensity. "Speak again. Tell me why you believe my daughter's support system is flawed." Rian struggled to meet the Emperor's gaze, but he forced himself to do so, because every question here demanded honesty. He spoke slowly, summarizing the same observations as before but with deeper context: how the microfractures formed, why the calibrations were misaligned, and why such errors should have been impossible unless caused by incompetence or something worse. The Emperor listened without interrupting, the lines around his eyes sharpening. When Rian finished, Emperor Kael signaled the guards. "Bring him," he commanded. The next room was a vast chamber pulsing with soft blue light, its walls lined with diagnostic screens and medical arrays. At its center floated the princess, still locked within her stasis chair, her breathing shallow but steady. The engineers surrounding her wore robes of prestige and carried devices worth more than Rian's lifetime earnings, yet their expressions were strained, their confidence evidently cracked by months of failure. The Emperor gestured for Rian to step forward. The elite engineers bristled, but obeyed the Emperor's silence. Rian approached the stasis chair cautiously, feeling dozens of eyes pierce his back. Up close, the flaws he'd seen earlier appeared even more pronounced, hidden beneath layers of specialized shielding only someone with his mechanics instincts could detect. He didn't touch anything. He simply observed, letting his mind unravel the knots of the system as if dissecting a malfunctioning life support unit on a freighter. One engineer scoffed. "Your Majesty, allowing a common mechanic to critique our work demeans the Empire's scientific standing." Another added with disdain, "He is guessing. At best." Rian wasn't offended. He was too focused. His gaze drifted to a narrow section beneath the neural relay. "Who replaced this stabilizer?" he asked aloud. The question silenced the room. The engineers exchanged glances, uncomfortable. Rian continued, "The coil alignment is off by nearly 2 microns. That's enough to cause neurological feedback loops. Your instrumentation can compensate for the instability, but only for a limited time." His words were simple, diagnostic, and painfully logical. The Emperor's voice dropped to a deadly quiet. "You are certain?" Rian nodded. "I don't know the politics or the tech behind the system, sir. But I know errors when I see them." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, the princess's eyes fluttered. It wasn't a random tremor. Her gaze shifted toward Rian with unmistakable intent. She blinked once, slow, deliberate. One of the engineers inhaled sharply. Her neural activity spiked. The Emperor stepped closer to his daughter, his stern facade cracking as a flicker of hope crossed his features. Rian felt something tighten in his chest at the sight. He wasn't a hero or a savant. He was a mechanic who had survived by noticing small things others ignored. Yet here he stood, facing the most powerful man in the Empire because he'd noticed a vibration pattern that shouldn't exist. The Emperor turned to him again. "You saw what they missed. Either by fate or skill, you understand something no one else does." His tone shifted, less imperial and more human. "You will attempt to diagnose the full system. My daughter's life demands it." Gasps rippled through the engineers. Some protested. Others stared in disbelief. Rian himself shook his head. "Your Majesty, I'm not trained for this. I'm not even qualified to touch this kind of equipment." "You are qualified by results," Emperor Kale replied. "And results are all I care for." The command carried no room for refusal. Rian approached the chair again, inhaling deeply. He felt the weight of expectations settle on him, a burden larger than any he had ever known. The princess watched him with faint but unmistakable recognition, as though she sensed something shifting in her fate. In that delicate silence, Rian realized he had stepped beyond the boundaries of his old life. Whatever happened next would reshape everything. Rian began his work under the silent scrutiny of the Empire's most brilliant minds, though their brilliance did little to conceal the tension woven through the chamber. Every engineer watched him with a blend of skepticism and restrained hostility, as if expecting him to snap a wire and end the royal bloodline by accident. Rian ignored them as best he could. He focused on the intricate weave of conduits and crystalline filaments supporting the princess's fragile body, letting his instincts guide him the way they always did when a machine sat moments from failure. The stasis chair was a masterpiece in theory, an elegant fusion of medical precision and gravitational engineering, but up close, its faults were glaring to him. Microfractures spiderwebbed through stabilizers, feedback sensors were misaligned by tiny but catastrophic degrees, and the energy lattice flickered in a pattern that felt wrong, almost deliberately flawed. He crouched beside the chair, tracing a line of faint shimmer with his eyes. "These fractures didn't happen from where," he murmured. "Something caused them." His voice carried enough weight to pull the nearest engineers into a hushed argument. One insisted that such sabotage was impossible under their watch. Another tried to dismiss his claim by citing theoretical stress patterns. Rian didn't engage. He pulled a diagnostic panel free and held it to the light, revealing a cluster of unnatural distortions humming like suppressed static. His pulse tightened as he realized what he was seeing. The Emperor approached. "Explain." "Someone inserted microdisruptors into the neural relay," Rian said quietly. "They're damping signal stability. At first glance, it looks like equipment failure, but it's not. This was intentional." A ripple of disbelief swept through the chamber, followed by outrage and denial. The engineers protested, insisting no saboteur could bypass Imperial security. Rian didn't argue. He simply held the component toward them. The evidence was undeniable: tiny, needle-like devices embedded in the circuitry, nearly invisible unless one tore the system apart piece by piece. And someone had gone through the trouble of making them look like normal wear. The Emperor's expression grew colder, the kind of cold that belonged to a man whose grief had been twisted into fury. "Find every device," he ordered, though it was Rian, not the engineers, who began dismantling the inner framework with rapid efficiency. His fingers moved with steady purpose, guided by years of coaxing life from damaged machinery. The stasis chair responded to his adjustments with subtle shifts in tone, as if recognizing the presence of someone who understood how to ease its suffering. Hours passed in an intense, silent rhythm. Engineers hovered nearby, both resentful and reluctantly impressed. Rian located several more disruptors, each embedded deeper than the last. Removing them required a precision that should have been impossible without advanced training, yet he worked with calm certainty. Sweat gathered on his brow, and lights flickered across the chamber as the chair recalibrated. Then a sharp alarm blared. A panel above Rian flashed crimson. Before he could react, a small mechanical drone descended from an unseen vent, its optics glowing with predatory focus. Its design was sleek, alien, and unmistakably hostile. It moved too fast for the guards to respond, angling straight toward Rian's head. Instinct took over. He grabbed a loose wrench and swung it upward. The steel connected with the metallic crack that sent the drone spinning. It recovered immediately, darts emerging from its sides. Rian dove behind a line of shielding panels, pulling one free and using it as a makeshift barrier. Darts clinked against the metal, sharp enough to punch holes straight through the alloy. The guards finally fired, blasting the drone out of the air in a burst of sparks. Its debris scattered across the polished floor, smoking and hissing. One guard rushed to Rian's side, astonished. How did you react so quickly? Rian shrugged, adrenaline trembling through his limbs. Machines try to kill you enough times in low-budget shipyards, you pick up a few habits. The Emperor surveyed the wreckage with chilling calm. Someone dares to strike within my own chamber, he said, the words laced with a fury that silenced everyone present. This confirms what we feared. His gaze fixed on the princess, then on Rian. Fixing her is no longer a matter of health alone. It is a matter of war. Rian felt the weight of that truth settle heavily on his shoulders, but he returned to work. Princess Lyra's eyes had followed the entire exchange, widening almost imperceptibly when the drone attacked. Now she regarded him with a depth that felt startlingly alive. As he resumed adjusting the stabilizers, she blinked in a slow, deliberate cadence, 3 short blinks followed by a long one. He paused, recognizing the pattern. It was an old human-coded gesture for gratitude. Someone must have taught her at some point in her diplomatic upbringing. You're welcome, he whispered, unsure if she could truly interpret spoken words. But something in her gaze softened, as if acknowledging the fragile line of trust forming between them. The engineers watched in tense silence as the chair's vital readouts shifted. Small improvements, nearly imperceptible, sparked across the monitors. Neural pathways flickered brighter. Respiratory tension decreased by measurable degrees. It wasn't recovery, not yet, but it was a direction no one had achieved before. Rian stepped back, breathing heavily. I've stabilized the relay for now. But whatever caused the damage, it's deeper than just these components. The system needs a full rebuild. The Emperor regarded him, the weight of his authority momentarily tempered by something like hope. Can you do it? Rian hesitated. Fixing a coolant valve or restructuring a faulty thruster coil was one thing. Rebuilding a royal medical system designed by the Empire's greatest minds was something else entirely. Yet every logical instinct told him only one answer was honest. Yes, he said, but I'll need time. And I'll need access to every component, every blueprint, every subsystem. If I miss even one fault, the whole thing collapses. The Emperor nodded slowly. You shall have it. The engineers stared, stunned that an unknown mechanic now held authority over them. Some glared openly. Bitterness etched across their faces. Others looked uncertain, torn between pride and recognition of his undeniable skill. Rian didn't care. The conflict no longer revolved around class or rank. Someone had nearly killed the princess twice, once through sabotage, once through the drone. The stakes had escalated into something vast and sinister. He looked again at Lyra, whose faint but deliberate eye movement met his with a quiet plea he understood intuitively. Whatever had begun when he accidentally sat at the wrong table had grown into something capable of shaking an empire. And now he stood in the center of it, whether he was ready or not. Rian worked in near silence, surrounded by arrays of hovering tools and diagnostic screens that bathed the chamber in shifting shades of pale blue. The deeper he dug into the princess's life support matrix, the more the truth revealed itself in patterns of sabotage too meticulous to be accidental. Someone of immense access and technical prowess had wanted Princess Lyra incapacitated, not killed outright, but trapped in a state of helpless suspension. Every component he examined hid another concealed fault, subtle enough to avoid routine inspection yet devastating when combined with the whole. It was a cage made of circuitry and light. Princess Lyra watched him with unwavering patience. Though her body remained motionless, her mind clearly fought to reach beyond her confinement. She had begun communicating through microblinks, patterns that formed rudimentary questions. Danger? She blinked once. Fixing? She blinked twice. He answered with quiet explanations, offering reassurance even when he wasn't certain reassurance was warranted. She responded with faint but resolute gratitude, each small exchange strengthening a bond neither of them had expected. The Emperor returned frequently, though his presence was never idle. He studied Rian's adjustments with a soldier's scrutiny, asking short, pointed questions that forced Rian to articulate every risk. Rian answered honestly, never pretending certainty where none existed. Strangely, this earned the Emperor's respect more quickly than any display of flawless competence. The court engineers, by contrast, simmered with jealousy and suspicion, whispering among themselves whenever Rian's back was turned. Their resentment mattered little. Facts were on his side, and the Emperor's orders silenced all dissent. Rian removed the final protective casing from the neural cradle, revealing a lattice of shimmering conduits that pulsed softly in rhythm with Lyra's weakened brain activity. He exhaled slowly. This was the heart of the sabotage. The previous faults were surface wounds. This was the blade planted deep. The lattice was intentionally misaligned by fractions of a millimeter, enough to choke her neurological impulses without fully severing them. Adjusting it required precision beyond the capacity of automated tools. One slip would collapse the entire system. He steadied his hands. As he began the recalibration, the chamber suddenly dimmed. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Rian stiffened, recognizing the telltale oscillation of a power reroute, one that was unauthorized. Emergency locks sealed the exits with a thunderous clang. The diagnostic screens flickered, and a crimson warning spiraled across the central display. Security override detected, an automated voice announced. Level Omega. Engineers scrambled in panic. Guards drew their weapons and formed a barrier around the Emperor and the princess. Rian remained at the cradle, fingers still gripping the adjustment tool. "If I stop now," he said sharply, "the calibration destabilizes." She could slip into neural collapse. The Emperor's jaw tightened. "Continue." The chamber light surged, then died completely. Backup illumination bathed the room in harsh red. A new sound emerged, a metallic scrape from deep within the walls. Then something tore through the ventilation shaft, landing on the floor with a predatory thud.
It was not a simple drone this time.
A humanoid machine unfolded itself, its limbs sleek and segmented, its optics burning with pale, white light. It moved with a fluid grace that spoke of an intelligence beyond simple programming. Engineers screamed and fled behind the guards. The creature fixated on the princess, then on the exposed neural cradle. Rian didn't think. He acted. He tore a stabilization rod free from the equipment cart beside him and hurled it at the machine's head. It clanged harmlessly off, but it stole the machine's attention for a crucial second. The guards opened fire, energy bolts crackling through the air, but the machine blurred aside, weaving between shots with unnatural precision. Sparks danced across the chamber as rounds tore into the walls. The machine lunged toward Rian. He ducked, rolled beneath the stasis chair, and slammed his palm onto a manual override. The chair descended into a protective position, shielding the princess behind a barrier of reinforced plating. The machine slashed at the plating and left deep glowing gouges, but the barrier held, for the moment. "Solace," the Emperor barked over the chaos. "Can you stop that thing?" "I fix things," Rian shouted back. "Not fight killing machines." And yet, he kept moving, not away, but toward the danger. He darted toward the maintenance port he had pried open earlier and ripped free a power coupling the size of his forearm. He slammed it onto the floor, exposing sparking conduits. Electricity arced violently. He grabbed a conductive cable, braced himself, and waited for the machine to leap.
It did.
He swung the cable upward, making contact with the machine's torso just as the exposed conduit flared. The chamber filled with a burst of blinding white light. The machine convulsed violently, its limbs locking as the surge flooded its systems. It crashed to the ground, twitching, then fell still. Rian collapsed beside it, chest heaving, his palms scorched. Guards swarmed the wreckage, confirming its deactivation. Engineers stared at him, wide-eyed. The Emperor stepped forward, his expression shifting from shock to something that resembled pride. "You risked your life without hesitation," the Emperor said. "For her." Rian wiped sweat from his brow, looking toward the stasis chair. "She's the only reason I'm still alive," he said quietly. "And she doesn't deserve to stay trapped like this." The Emperor nodded once. Then finish what you started. Rian returned to the cradle. His hands trembled, but the princess blinked a steady pattern, 3 slow blinks, the closest she had come to reassurance. He resumed the calibration. Minutes passed like hours. At last, he tightened the final conductor and watched as the lattice aligned perfectly for the first time since her injury. The vital displays surged with renewed strength. Neural signals flowed like rivers restored. Princess Lyra inhaled a slow, deep breath. Her fingers twitched. Then her lips parted ever so slightly, forming a faint, fragile sound that broke through months of silence. Father. The Emperor's breath caught. Engineers froze. Rian stared, hardly daring to believe it. Princess Lyra's gaze shifted toward him, clearer now, fuller, alive. Thank you, she whispered. The system stabilized, pulsing with gentle light. It wasn't full recovery, not yet, but it was the first step towards something greater. Rian knew their journey was far from over. Whoever sabotaged her system would not stop. The attack had proven that. But for the first time, hope felt real. And Rian Solace, the poor mechanic who sat at the wrong table, understood he had stepped into a war he could no longer walk away from.